Hello, everyone. Today we will be jumping in with the second lesson of our Japanese basics. Last week we focused on just the very basics, the most simple sentence, and I will be using the VC Events channel for typing. Feel free to look at the screen share, which has renshuu on it, but I'll also be using that channel. And as most of you know, but just in case you don't, if you have a question, feel free to type it out at any point, even if I'm in the middle of speaking. Just drop it out there, and I or someone else will get to it. There's not really official, hey, this is question time sections. So if you've got a question, just let us know whenever you want. But anyway, last week we were focusing on this sentence pattern. And if you recall, I really focused on the idea of patterns over, especially for beginners, patterns over breaking up sentences into each individual component and trying to understand them as components. That's something that comes with your Japanese level as you get better. But initially, there's a lot of, I'm not exactly sure why this, acts the way it does, but, this is a pattern and this is the pattern I'm going to use. And we focused on the A wa B does pattern last week. And we all were practicing talking about, what our names were and, if we're sleepy or if we're cute or whatnot. And we're going to take that. And as I mentioned, it might feel overly simplistic to you. You think to yourself, oh, no one uses this. This is textbook Japanese. This isn't the Japanese that people actually use. But you're going to see that this pattern is the core construct for a lot of Japanese that's actually used. And what we're going to start doing from today on is taking this pattern and stretching it out, dropping in two words in a place that originally took one, and so forth, to make them more expressive, easier to convey what you are using. And today we're going to focus on this little guy right here, the no particle. And that's going to be our focus. Now, before we talk about it, does anyone remember how I described last time we talked about the wa particle? What did I say particles were? Like I used a word. I said, you really should think about particles this way. What was the word I used? Does anyone remember what I called them? They're markers. There was another word, an actual signposts. Yes. I mean, you're all saying the same thing, but I called them signposts. And the reason I did that, for those of you that weren't here, is that particles often direct us to something in the sentence, but they may not be part of the sentence itself. And the reason I said that is that it's not, a signpost. If you have a signpost in front of a building and the signpost is pointing to this door and saying general entrance, is that signpost part of the building? No. But is it something that's giving us information about the building? Yes. And as we're going to see with the wa particle before, with this no particle, and many of the ones that we will learn in the future, a lot of them don't have explicit translations where we can say this particle exists as this English word in the translation. However, this particle has a job. It's pointing to something in the sentence and it's giving us information about that. And that will hopefully help pull you away a bit from the I must translate every word into some other word, and we all start that way. And that's not necessarily a bad way to think about things. We all start with sentence in our L1, our native language, and wanting to translate that to the L2, which would be Japanese. Or backwards, seeing a Japanese sentence and wanting to switch it to, something we can understand in English. So with that in mind, let's take a look at no. No has a lot of different usages. They all fall into the same category generally, and we're going to focus on two or three of them today. The most common one is used to mark possession. And this is one of the ones where if you had to translate it, you might see it represented this way. You might see someone or something saying, hey, it's the apostrophe S that we throw behind words. And that works, 10% of the time. Even that, though, is not a sufficient way of describing it. Now, I'd like to show you something. It's not in the lesson, not yet, but I think it will help set a frame for how we're going to understand it. No always comes between two nouns. Always comes between two nouns, generally speaking. There's some special cases, as there are with every grammar rule, but generally speaking, we've got two nouns. And the way this works is, I'm going to rewrite this. I'm going to rewrite the A and the B for you. The no is something that takes what's on the left. Remember, particles always point to the left. Whatever comes before the particle is what that particle is holding on to and saying, hey, look at this. This is what we're talking about right now. What a no does is it takes a noun and it adds information to it. Let me say that again. It takes a noun and it adds information to it. If you can get this one concept down, every other usage of no will fall into place. This is the overarching rule that covers all of them. And when I say it adds information to it, another way you could think of it is it adds specificity. This is a word that people don't hear that often, but it's a cool word. And let me show you what it means. Let's take a look at this word right here, namae. Does anyone know what it means? If so, can you type it out for me? What does namae mean? It means name. Thank you. And just in case you're wondering, if other people type the answer, can I type the answer too? Go for it. I love seeing many people contribute, even if it's just typing out the answer that came before them. That's totally okay. So it means name. Now, so let's say I just say that word to you. I say namae. What name am I talking about? Whose name am I talking about? How many names am I talking about? You have no idea. The noun, namae, is as general as it can get. There's no specificity. We don't know whose name, what name, it's just name. That's where the no comes in. No can be used to say, all right, of all the names in the world, of all the billions and trillions of names in the world, names of objects, names of animals, names of people, names of characters on Japanese study sites, which name are we talking about? We need specificity. And the no takes a general noun and makes it more specific. And one way it can do that is by showing possession. So let's jump into some examples. Right now, a second ago, I gave you the A, no B. And as I mentioned, it always hooks to the left. It talks about whatever word comes before it. And so with this one, we're going to focus just on that A part. So if we have watashi no together, this would mean my. Now this is one of those, interesting things where the translations kind of break down. Where if you're going for a one-to-one translation, you will see that, watashi is usually I, but with watashi no, it ceases to be I. You can't put that I in the sentence anymore. Watashi no together means my. And let's go ahead and put the namae that I put out. So again, namae by itself, we have no idea what name we're talking about. It could be one of so many names. How can we focus in on this? If we put watashi no namae, we're now saying, which name? Oh, it's I's name. It's my name. We're taking that general noun and we're making it more specific. So watashi no would be my. My name, my dog, my house, my smartphone, my pet zombie, whatever happens to be. Similarly, anata no would be your. Now, if we have time at the end of the lesson, we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls with this particular word, anata. It's one word that if you have had classes, formal Japanese classes, or you've used a Japanese textbook, there's probably a real big asterisk next to the word anata. And it said, don't use this. And the don't use this is one of those warnings that works well in the beginning. Of course, it's a word that can be used, but until you know how to use it, it's actually kind of a dangerous word, which how could anatta be dangerous? If we have time at the end of today's lesson, we will talk about that. But for now, just have anatta no as your stuck in your head. Okay? Now, our lovely mascot, who is dressed up as a student at the top of the page, Kao-chan no. So that would be, Kao-chan's. Whether it's watashi no, my, anata no, your, Kao-chan no. These are all, you can put any noun in there and use it to show possession over something. So, jumping into what we had a second ago, watashi no namae would be, my name. And all of a sudden, we have, 3 words that we can use in place of, one word before. We had the last week, we had that e wa bi desu sentence. And before I said that a, that's a noun. Now what we have in front of us, watashi no namae, that's also a noun. It's just a noun with a little bit of extra information attached to it. So in that a spot, we can drop this in and say, watashi no namae wa, and then stick our name in there. And just for a quick practice, a quick warm-up, this might be really easy for some of you, might not be, but let's try this out. Let's try this out for size. I'm going to go ahead and jump in first and say, watashi no namae wa Michael desu. Both this and the one we used last week, watashi wa Michael desu, these are both completely natural. They both work. I wouldn't say this one's better than the other one. This one's just a bit, a bit clearer. Watashi no namae wa Michael desu. So if you feel like giving it a shot, go ahead and type it into the channel. You're free to use kanji if you know a few. You can use the, hiragana and katakana the way I did. You can use romaji if you don't have the Japanese installed. So we have a few people, and Demi already cheated and jumped to the next thing we're going to talk about. And they, started using something else instead of namae, which is fine. They're using the my part, watashi no. But I see a lot of people putting their names out. Thank you so much. And as I mentioned last week, you're free to put spaces in between your words. This is not the way you would write Japanese if you're actually writing it out. I put spaces in there to help beginners. And this is the same thing that it's not just this is what Michael's doing and what Renshuu's doing. This is what Japanese textbooks, my son's, he's a first grader in primary school in a Japanese school. And this is what his textbook will do when it has sentences. It will split up the words. Now, pulling this back to what we were talking about before, we originally said our A wa B desu sentence, we were saying A is B. This pattern is used to say this thing that we're talking about before, it's the thing that comes after it. These two things are the same. One's describing the other. And so, like on the page, watashi no namae wa Kao desu. we're using this to talk about, my name is Carl. My name is the same as Carl. Now let's, oh, and it's just highlighting what we just talked about. Let's jump away from this just a little bit. We don't have to use namai. We can use other things as well. Again, this no is being used to put specificity, add information to what comes after it. And again, let's take the word, ototo, which means, anyone? What's ototo? Aside from a fun word to say. Little bro. Yes, little brother. So if we say watashi no ototo, it's my little brother, my younger brother, my little bro. Whichever works for you. And this is fine. Watashi no ototo wa Kao desu. This would work. And let's practice using this as well. Now, some of you may or may not have a little brother or little sister, or older brother, older sister. You might have, a mother or a father or a friend. And let's try and give the name of someone else that we know. It might be a teacher's name. And so you can just say watashi no, and then whoever you're talking about. And finish it up like this. If you're not quite sure what that word is, for example, what's older brother or what's teacher, feel free to ask, and we'll be happy to answer that for you. So talk about a friend, talk about a mother, a father, a pet. And yeah, feel free to make mistakes. This is really the safest place for making mistakes. It's not a classroom where everyone's going to turn around at you and look at you if you say something strange. This is just a place for us to relax and practice using this. So I see someone talking about their cat, about their pet, about friends, little brothers, dogs. Now, my guess is that it's your IME, your Japanese, the translator inside of your keyboard, your input device. But with pet, I see it popping up a couple of times. Make sure everything is in katakana for pet, petto. It's a fully katakana word. If you're still typing, feel free to do so, but I'm going to keep talking a little bit. And can you use Romaji? Yeah, go for it. We often do have people. If you don't have Japanese installed or you don't want to deal with it, that's totally fine. There are no requirements for how you interact with these lessons. It's whatever works for you. But while a couple more people are typing, we're coming back to this original sentence that looked way too small when we started, and all of a sudden it's getting bigger. We're expanding it. And just now we dropped in this no guy and we stuck it right in the beginning. Can we use it in the second spot? Of course. So I'm going to copy, I'm going to see if I can find someone that's got just hiragana and katakana. And FIFO, this was a sentence that FIFO put out. Watashi no petto wa 복세를です. And I'm going to type it once more so we have the correct katakana in there. Now, if you look at that, you see the wa, you see the des, and you can see it's equating two parts. It's saying watashi no petto, that's one chunk, and there's bokseru, that's the second one. Can you flip those? Sure. There's nothing saying that the no needs to come in the first spot or the second spot. So you could say something like, I'm going to type it out for you. You could say this, bokseru wa watashi no petto desu. And this would be fine. The no's are really nice in that they can take any noun anywhere in the sentence and further, expand out on it and add information, add specificity to it. And if you'd like to see another set of sentences side by side, just like the one we did, you can see it on the screen share. Watashi no ototo wa Kao desu. Kao wa watashi no ototo desu. You might translate these slightly differently, but you're, putting forward the same amount of information. My little brother is Kao, or Kao is my little brother. You're still giving the name of your younger brother, in either one, and they both work. Now, I haven't seen this question asked, but I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead of it. Maybe you're wondering, so let's look at this sentence that's on the screen right now. Watashi no ototo wa Kao desu. So, just answer. Just take, give me your gut reaction. Right now, there's one no in that sentence. Watashi no ototo. What about two no's? Can we chain no's one after another? What do you think? Yes or no? Give me a quick answer. A yes or a no? All right. Most people are saying yes, and that answer is correct. So going back to the sentence that we had there, watashi no ototo wa Kao desu. Literally, if we were literally translating it as close as we could say my brother or my younger brother is Kao. And that works. Contextually, if you know that Kao is a name, then you can read in between the lines and understand that, oh, we're talking about his little brother's name. However, you could, if you want to be more specific, you could drop another one in there. Watashi no ototo no namae wa Kao desu. And that's fine. If you go from right to left, you have namae. Okay, of all the namaes in the world, which one are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about a little brother's namae. Got it. Okay. Wait. Whose little brother? There's a lot of little brothers. Now, which little brother is it? Oh, it's my little brother. My little brother's name. Now, I wouldn't recommend sticking too many no's in a row. Typically, there's better ways, depending on the context, there's better ways to phrase a sentence than, using no, 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 no. But if you're going up to, say, a couple of no's, then you're fine. And FIFO gave a good example that has a tiny mistake, but that aside, watashi no haha no neko no tabemono. I'm going to stop there. That's enough notes for me. By the way, I mentioned this last time, but if someone puts out a sentence and it's got kanji in it, you have no idea what that kanji is, add the little Kao-chan with the question marker next to it, and Kao-chan will jump in here and let us know what those, what those kanji can be read as. Okay, let's keep going. We have just a bit more. Today's kind of a short lesson relative to last week's lesson, and then we'll have a chance to practice a little bit, as well as talk about some more, specifics. So when we started, I described no as something that adds information. It's something that adds specificity. And I said that because I also said that there's actually a lot of different ways we can use no, and they're not all just the possessive. So if you look at no and you think of it as, oh, no is just my, his, her, your, our, then you're restricting yourself. It's going to make it to where that rule doesn't work anymore. And we're going to talk about um, one more way that we can use no. And let's take a look at what's on the screen right now. 今日の天気. 今日の天気. Now, quick check before I say them. What's 今日? 今日 is today. Awesome. 4 people at the same time. And what's 天気? 今日の天気 is weather. Exactly. Thank you. We have more people answering. Great. So, if I say 今日の天気, how would you translate that? Now, this isn't a full sentence. This is just 3 words. We're talking about... Now, a bunch of people put today's weather. Most people did. And you're sticking with, the possessive form. But could you also say the weather today? The weather of today might not be, perfectly natural English, but you're going in the right direction. The idea here is that there's not a single way to necessarily use this. We have weather, and we're trying to focus on which weather it is. And let me give you one more example real fast. So in this one, the people that said today's weather, that's totally okay. That works. You could also say the weather today. So let's flesh this out a little bit. Let me give you a full sentence and say today in Japan, it's starting to cool off. And does anyone remember how you say cool in Japanese? Not the, oh, he's so cool, but cool temperature-wise. Suzushi. Samui is taking it the next step up. Samui is flat out cold. Suzushi is that spot just before cold. So it's cool, but not cold. So let me get the full sentence out. Whoops. So look at the sentence that I have. Excuse me, there's 2 no's in there. Or there's 2 wa's. There should be a no. Let me fix that for you. 今日の天気は涼しいです. So how might we translate this? This is where what's the translation? This is where it breaks down a little bit, that there's not necessarily a single way to translate it. It could say the weather today is cool. You could also say today's weather is cool. You might even say the weather for today is cool. It's cool today. Now, FIFO is doing something that might make some of your brains kind of go, what's going on? That's not the order. That's not the way it works. But FIFO's translation is a natural, accurate translation. It's cool today. This word order doesn't work in Japanese. But if you spoke in English first and you said, it's cool today, and someone said, hey, what does that mean in Japanese? And they said, that one, their translation might be closer to 今日は涼しいです, and dropping the tenki part. But when you're dealing with translations between 2 languages, you shouldn't focus 100% on that literal accuracy. You're trying to think to yourself, okay, what's the information I'm trying to get from my head or from this sentence into the other language? And if you start to look at these as patterns, you're going to find yourself much more capable of translating. So after today's lesson is done, someone says, oh, how do you say this in Japanese? And you say, oh, that I just learned that no, and it means possessive, and it talks about adding information. Okay, we did this. And we say, oh, kyou no tenki wa suzushii desu. And you feel great. You're like, all right, I understood that. I remember it. I could translate it. And then the next person asks you, all right, well, how do you translate this? The weather today is cool. And you stop and you say, oh, I didn't learn that order. Do I say tenki kyou wa suzushi? No, that doesn't work. But you look at it as chunks. I'm talking about the weather today. I'm talking about cool. How can I talk about weather? Oh, that's tenki. How can I focus in on it and say it's today's weather? Oh, that's kyou no tenki. So let's step away from the possession aspect of it. Now that works really nicely when you have watashi no or kare no. Watashi no is my, kare no is his, sensei no is the teacher's. But when we get to natural language, and truth be told, that's what all of us use. We don't use the most simple sentences. We say one thing in 20 different ways. You're going to need that flexibility. And so, try and keep in mind that the sentence in front of you could be, today's weather. It could be the weather today. It could be the weather for today. These all work. And let me give you one more example. So I am in Japan. I'm in Niigata, specifically Niigata Prefecture. And so what if I did this? Niigata no tenki wa suzushii desu. How would you translate that first part? Niigata no tenki. You actually, now there's not an officially correct answer to this, but most people, I think, a native English speaker probably wouldn't say Niigata's weather is cool. They'd probably use what Demi said, and they'd say the weather in Niigata is cool. And all of a sudden you have this in the English, in, and you're saying, wait, does that mean no means in? No, that's not the case. It's that we have the weather, tenki, and we're adding information to it. What are we adding to it? We're taking all the tenki in the world, all the tenki in the universe, and we're saying it's the tenki that deals with Niigata. It's Niigata's weather. It's the weather in Niigata. So particles like no and many other particles that we're going to deal with, you'll find that there's not necessarily a single word or even a small set of words that can represent all the different ways that we use this particle. And it is frustrating at first. I don't think there's anyone that says, okay, I love ambiguity. Japanese is awesome. It's you want to understand and you want to be able to process these things. And it is frustrating, but it's something you get used to. And FIFO, unless you are looking at the lesson in another screen and you're cheating, then you amazingly typed out what's on the next panel. So again, take a look at what FIFO put or what's on the screen. I'm going to type it out one more time in hiragana. Nihongo no sensei. So many teachers out there, different kinds of teachers, different grade levels of teachers, different subjects. What teacher are we talking about? And although we might live in a world one day where Japanese takes on sentience and starts owning teachers, until that day comes, we are safe to say that if it's Nihongo no sensei, we're not talking about, Japanese's teacher. We're talking about the Japanese teacher. And so in that sentence, it's not even that, oh, in this sentence, no means in, or no means apostrophe s. In this sentence, the no literally doesn't exist in the English translation. Nihongo no sensei just means Japanese teacher. But can you see how it's doing the same thing? It's just adding information to the noun that follows it. It's just adding information to the noun that follows it. If you can hold on to that, then the few examples of no that we use today, as well as every single one we'll see after this, then could you use, I'll answer that question in a second. Then you'll get a better feel for how we use no. Now we're going to practice this in just a minute, but Muta has a question. Could you use ni or de for weather at a location too? You could, not the sentence that you used. You could say, for example, now the question they asked is stepping out a bit higher than what I call Japanese basics, because it involves combinations of particles. If you are doing this, technically, I feel like maybe this would work in a technical aspect, but no one would ever say this. Niigata de no tenki, the tenki that exists in Niigata. But even that you wouldn't say because it's unnecessary. So at best, you could use this. But I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that in general, if you can get by with a simpler, usage, that tends to be the more natural one. And remember that one of the reasons why this doesn't really work is that, first off, ni is used for existence, and this isn't something we've talked about in these lessons yet, but ni is for there is a cat, there is a book. And weather is more of a concept than something that exists. Now, rain exists, right? And clouds exist and snow exists, but weather, weather doesn't exist, so to speak, in the sense that we could use it with the ni particle. The de particle is used to describe the location of an action taking place. I play soccer at school, or I study in the library. And there's no action associated with weather. There's action associated with rain falling, with snow falling, with wind blowing, but weather itself is a bit more general. And so we usually just say the weather is rainy. The weather is cold, or it's hot. But good question. So we're actually at the end of our lesson. And so what I want to do is practice with this just a little bit. And then we're going to swing back around and hit some specifics with the no, is specifically the anata no that we mentioned at the beginning. So here's what I'd like you to do. I have no idea how many countries we represent today's group, but I'm guessing there's at least 5 or 6 countries out of the 23 of us that are here. And I'd like you to tell me about something in your country that is delicious. And if you didn't know, delicious is oishii. And so I'm from America originally. And inside of that, I'm from Texas. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say Texas no tacos. Tacos, as in the Tex-Mex food. Tex-Mex no tacos wa oishii desu. The tacos in Texas are delicious, are yummy, are good. And I'd like you to try and introduce, something from your city, from your country. And so you have most of the sentence built out for you already. We've got the no, we've got the wa oishi des. This all works. The first spot, should be where it's coming from, and the second one should be the food. If you have any questions about, how to write something, like how do I write this country or how do I write this food, just ask us. We'd be happy to answer. So let's see and if you want to throw a picture up with your sentence, go for it. But let's see what kind of answers we can get. Looks like we got some pictures coming in there. We got some barbecue, some chicken rice. Yum, yum. That looks good. And while other people are typing, I'm going to go ahead and mention something from Niigata. Niigata it's a little known prefecture. Most people don't know about it. I certainly didn't before I moved here. But some of the best rice in the country is grown in Niigata. And what comes from rice? Aside from the other 90% of Japanese foods, sake, or Japanese liquor, nihonshu. And so good rice means good sake, which means a lot of the sake, which is made in Niigata, is quite good if you're partial to that. I found it interesting that a lot of the local sake, which you can buy at the local supermarket, you know, is the same sake, which if you go down south, I think I was in Hiroshima, which is pretty far south in Japan. And we were at a bar one evening drinking, and they had all the sake that were available. And inside of there, they had, special exotic sake all the way from Niigata. And it was the same things that I could buy at the local store, which I thought was cool. Thank you everyone for sticking the pictures up as well. That's great. But it looks like you all have a handle on this no that we studied today. And we have a few more minutes before we end things. I wanted to take the time and jump way back to the beginning and discuss this guy right here, anata no, and specifically anata. This is somewhat of an aside, but as you learn Japanese, you'll hear the word polite and casual used a lot. In that, I would say most, if not all, languages have a sense of polite language and casual language. But in Japanese, it's extremely explicit in the sense that these verb conjugations are casual, or this verb conjugation is polite. And contrary to what you may think, in Japanese, you don't really have a choice as to which one you use. Generally speaking, certain politeness levels are expected in certain situations. And it goes contrary to the way that some of you may want to present yourself. Coming from the US, coming from Texas, I would say on average, people are generally pretty friendly. And so you can strike up a conversation with someone waiting in line at a restaurant, and you can say, hey, how's it going? And talk to them the way you might talk to a friend. And your inclination might say, oh, I want to maintain my friendly persona in Japanese, so I'm going to speak casually, which is not something you can do. And we will get to casual language later, but for a lot of things in Japanese that are not they're not the standard polite Japanese, I typically say don't use it at all until you've heard it enough to be comfortable when it is and isn't appropriate. And anata kind of falls into that category. I would say, generally speaking, just don't use it at all. Does that mean you can never use it? No. What it does mean is that it is dangerous enough. When I say danger, I don't mean it's going to cause someone to want to fight you. It means that it's dangerous enough so that you might come across as rude if you use it when you shouldn't be. And none of us want to be rude. We want to be friendly, we want to be kind and nice and polite. And so until you know exactly when you can use it, you shouldn't. And so with this word specifically, anata, a lot of people say, wait, well, what should I do then? Because the words you and your are extremely common in English and many other languages. It's a pronoun that we use 100 times a day. And we never say anata in Japanese, almost never. Typically speaking, we use the person's name when we're talking to someone, even if the person is in front of us. And so some of you have, through using renshuu, have found out that a lot of the artwork, actually most of the artwork on renshuu, is done by my wife, Saki. And, she's my wife. She's the mother of my children. And so I would say we have a pretty casual relationship. We're family. And I never use anata with her. I never use anata. Typically, if I'm talking about, for example, a book, that she has, I would say Saki no hon. Now, if I was translating it in English, I'd say your book. Because saying Saki's book in English while talking directly to Saki would sound strange. But you typically use a person's name even if they're right in front of you. And generally speaking, you're going to use that honorific. You're going to use the Saki-san or Michael-san. And again, san is it's a politeness marker. It's technically called an honorific. And there are times where you can get by without using it. For example, I don't need to use it with my wife or with my children. But you shouldn't drop it until you're very, very clear as to when you are allowed to drop it. It's not, you're not going to sound too stuffy or over polite by using it. And so it's safe. It's a safe thing. So to repeat, anata, generally avoid. If you're saying, are you okay? If you're saying, is this your book? Or what have you, you use their name. Even when, Japanese is a contextual language, so you often drop things that aren't necessary, which makes you think, well, it's obvious that I'm talking to them, I'm looking at them in the eye. If you're using some word in the sentence to represent them, for example, Saki no hon, use their name. Don't use anata. Now, Dani just put a question up, which is a really good question. There's often the case where you don't know the person's name. For example, if it's an employee at a store, at a 7-Eleven that you walk into. And this is getting, a bit further out the lesson that we're learning. But generally speaking, if it's clear who you're talking about in a sentence, you don't need to say anything about them at all. So I realize that this is adding grammar that we haven't learned yet, but Raito gave a good example. Let's say I'm talking to my wife and I'm asking, if she's okay. And to ask someone if they're okay, you say, 大丈夫ですか? Daijobu is okay, and the ka on the end of it, that's the question marker. So we haven't learned that yet, but just put that to the side. So the full sentence would be Saki wa daijobu desu ka? However, if I'm looking her in the eye and it's clear I'm talking to her, it is completely natural and acceptable to drop the saki wa and just say daijoubu desu ka? Because of course I'm talking to her. I'm looking right at her. So you don't need it if it's clear who you're talking to. So back to Danny's question, if you're, I'm guessing if you were asking about, someone, an employee, you're probably talking to that employee and saying, "Oh, do you?" I'm not sure what you might ask them. "Oh, do you have an extra spoon?" For example, you wouldn't need to say, "Do you?" Okay, I shouldn't use you. I need to use something else. Do you have another spoon? You wouldn't even say the you part. You would just in Japanese say, "Have another spoon?" And you can just drop it altogether. If you were talking to, if I was talking to Saki and referencing, you know, an employee on the other side of the room saying, "Hey, that employee, do they, do you know them?" Then I might refer to them from their job title. I might say that employee, Tane. But generally speaking, if you don't know someone's name, and this will happen, just get eye contact, make eye contact with them, and then you don't need to use their name, which is what saved me for several weeks and months when I first moved to Japan, and there were so many teachers I couldn't remember their names, and so I just would do whatever I could to get them to look at me and then ask them something. But that being the case, I think we are done with today's lesson, and we're about out of time. So if you need to go back and look at this in the future, it's inside of renshuu under the resources section and Japanese basics. And we were right up at the top, right here, the possessive no. So thank you so much for coming.